Good evening, friends, and welcome to another edition of Crime Time with DutyRon and Ed Wallace. We are retired New York City police detectives and 9/11 World Trade Center first responders. And if you like all things true crime related from the police detective's perspective, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell so you'll get all things DutyRon and this guy, Ed Wallace, over here when we go live or upload another video. Tonight, we have a really interesting and informative live stream for you guys. We're going to be talking about Rex Heuermann, the Gilgo Beach murder suspect, the evidence collected from his home and his vehicle. Can the M-Vac be used? And we're going to get into it, not just with us. We have the president and CEO of M-Vac Systems, Jared Bradley. He's been on our show before, and we talked and had an in-depth conversation about Brian Kohlberger and the Idaho murders. And now we're going to get into it tonight. Ed, how you doing?
Doing good, Ron. Doing good. Yourself?
Not too bad. Thanks for asking. And I'm looking forward to this weekend because it's the Mrs. Birthday weekend celebration. We go up to Stonington, Connecticut, and I'm going to spend the weekend up in Stonington. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. My wife loves it up there. I am going to bring my live streaming gear, not to do true crime, but to show the beautiful marina in Stonington. I'm going to try to give everybody a little bit of therapy this weekend. And we're going to get away from the true crime, and we're going to hang out with Mrs. DutyRon on her birthday. So that's the plan. But we have a really, really informative live. Ed, I wanted to talk to you quickly before we bring Jared Bradley into the stream. We found out some exciting news about the M-Vac. And for those of you who are like saying, what's this M-Vac? What is it? It's a vacuum system. It's a vacuum type system, a wet vacuum type system that extracts DNA from porous surfaces, from clothing, from just about anything. And it extracts a 200% or some type of, we're going to hear the percentages. It extracts a ridiculous amount of DNA as opposed to just swabbing. Ed, you want to talk a little bit about it? And how exciting is it that Suffolk County Police and the state police, that's two agencies in the task force, have the M-Vac?
Yeah, and there's no doubt in my mind that they're going to be using this, especially on some of the items that it appears they've taken from the house, and definitely the vehicle that they seized from South Carolina. Yeah, so this is a home run. We're talking about potential DNA evidence from maybe 2007 or even beyond that, that could be potentially in that vehicle or in parts of the house.
Right. And so, Ed, let's talk about this burlap wrapped type situation that all four of these victims were wrapped in. That's preserving any clothing that's left behind, any type of things. And listen, that burlap had to be handled by somebody, right?
Right. Absolutely.
And can come into play there. I want you to just talk a little bit.
Not only that, but the bindings, the belts, the things that were used to tie the victims up around the torso, around the ankles, and so forth. That can be re-looked at again, utilizing the M-Vac. And in the past they might have just swabbed, but now you can hit it again with the M-Vac and see if we can find his genetic profile on these materials.
And that's exciting in itself. And I'm sure that the creator of this, Jared's dad, Dr. Bruce Bradley, is probably looking down and saying, wow, my creation, my invention, my vacuum, the M-Vac that was originally made to try to combat the E. coli outbreak from, what was that? Not Taco Bell. I don't want to say.
That was Jack in the Box.
Yeah,
Jack in the Box. Yeah, Jack put a few people in the box.
Jack certainly did, and hence Dr. Bruce Bradley, a University of Idaho alum as well, right? He whipped up this invention. Hey, listen, let's, without further ado, because I have a 3-minute piece that's going to give a case study on the M-Vac. I want to get Jared on to talk about this. They solved an 18-year cold case homicide using the M-Vac, and I want Jared to come on. So without further ado, the president CEO of M-Vac Systems, Jared Bradley. Jared, thank you for being here with Ed and I on a Thursday evening.
Hey guys, man, it's a pleasure to be back on. What an
pleasure
honor
to have you. Pleasure to have you.
Yeah, it's
Hey, guys, I got to tell you, last time I was on, this is how awesome your listeners and followers are. So last time I was on was several months ago. A whole bunch of them came over and started listening to my podcast as well. And so I can't tell you how much I appreciate that.
yeah.
Well, happy to support good people like yourself, Jared.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Jared, I wanted you to talk with the audience just first a little bit about an overview and the history of, and I tried to give it in a condensed version. Your dad, Dr. Bruce Bradley, came up with this M-Vac system for not criminal cases, but to combat a E. coli outbreak, to save people across the country from contaminated food. But that didn't work out. But I wanted you to tell the story, if you could, about how this all came about.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. So in 1993, we know, especially on the West Coast, there was that E. coli outbreak with the hamburger chain because they were cooking hamburgers to order instead of, cooking them all the way through. And so E. coli has a habit of growing really fast in a rich, environment like that. And so with the amount of hamburger that they spread all over, I don't know how many people actually got sick, but I think there were something like 140 people got put into permanent kidney failure. A number of kids died, and it was just a mess. And so right about that time frame, my dad had it really bothered him. His first grandchild was born right around there. It's like, how in the world are we killing kids? And so he started thinking about the problem and realized that the upfront sampling was kind of the weak link, because they were covering a huge amount of surface area on both the beef carcasses and the chutes and everything that, even the equipment that they use to harvest these animals. And so we started looking at, well, if that's the problem, then how do you get more aggressive? How do you cover more surface area? How do you get deeper into a surface? And that's when the idea of the wet vacuum came to him. And so he originally had that idea of the wet vacuum, but then he had to go through a ton of research on how exactly to isolate the sample without re-aerosolizing it, without spreading it around. So it had to collect continually is basically the problem, because and that's really a problem with the swab as well as the sponge and other conventional items. Is once you saturate it, it just kind of spreads around. It doesn't matter if it's DNA or E. coli. So you need to be able to collect it on a continual basis, and that's where the wet vacuum really has advantages. And so we launched it in 2007 in the food industry, and then right around 2012 is when we switched over to forensics, and that's where we've been ever since.
Wow. It's fascinating, really. And for me to see from the law enforcement side, this device being used in solving cold case homicide cases, it's worth its weight in gold. And we talked about the cost factor. Ed, you mentioned in the beginning you guys had gotten your hands on one and it was quite expensive, and then Jared was saying that out the gate now they've managed to produce it and make it where agencies and smaller departments, they can go out and purchase one of these and share them interagencies and around different counties and so forth. And that's a great thing, because not only is it now helping just one jurisdiction, it's helping whole big areas with law enforcement. So
it's not only that though, because now there are grants that you could utilize from the Department of Justice, National Institute of Justice, or even the Department of Homeland Security to get the funding to get these M-Vacs into your police lab or to your crime scene units.
Yeah. Hey, I want to play, if you don't mind, Jared. It's only like a 3-minute piece, but this highlights the case that I was talking about with Crystal Lynn. I'm gonna botch her last name. Beslanowicz. Thank you. So that was an important case because that really got, I feel, it got the M-Vac on the map, and people started talking about it. It was an 18-year-old cold case. And it wasn't moving. They had a partial profile, but they couldn't really do much with it. and then they took your device, the M-Vac, and M-Vac'd a rock that was used to murder this poor innocent 17-year-old girl. So let's take a listen to this, and we'll be back in a few.
Of December 16th, 1995, I was dispatched about 1 minute to 10 in the morning to a location on the Upper Provo River. The report of a deceased person found along the Provo River. In discovering some of the evidence in the area, like wounds to her body, it definitely had appeared that she was murdered in this location. She took quite a beating from the looks of things with granite rock, which is a very rough, pointed, jagged type of stone. We found 2 different rocks that happened to have what appeared to be body matter, as well as blood on these rocks, and some very large stones that had quite a bit of blood on them that appeared to have been used after she had been down, which had been dropped on her skull. To begin with, we had worked this case for a couple of years with not coming up with a whole lot of good leads. I mean, we had several leads, but that took us from Washington State to South Dakota, but nothing really panned out that great. It wasn't until 2009 when then Detective Wayne Winterton had heard about some new evidence techniques to be checked with Sorensen Forensic. The stones were taken to Sorensen Forensic, and the science and everything that was gathered and collected there, we realized we had some information that we knew then that was a solvable case. One thing led to another, and we was directed to a company by the name of M-Vac.
I was watching the local news and seen an article that they had on there of the M-Vac. And it was a new way to collect DNA off of different materials at a crime scene. So I contacted Karma at Sorensen Forensics and asked her if she had heard of the M-Vac, and she said, well, yes, we have one. And I says, great. Could we M-Vac the rocks that we had initially swabbed? And she says, sure, it's whatever you'd like to do. So we sat down and as a team and talked about it, and we thought we'll send the rock down that had the partial DNA profile on it, along with the additional 2 rocks that had never been tested that had been collected from the crime scene in 1995. They went ahead and used the M-Vac to do the testing, and they came back with a male DNA profile, a full male DNA profile that matched that of Joseph Michael Simpson. So we were really excited about this because now we had a full DNA profile off of what we considered was one of the murder weapons that had killed Crystal at the scene.
Ultimately, it made the case. And I believe that Mr. Simpson's in prison today due large part to the M-Vac system. Obviously, some good police work, but solid case because of the M-Vac system.
It was only because we were able to collect the amount of DNA from the rocks, from that porous surface, which a swab isn't going to get to, and the M-Vac was able to get to. It was only because of that we had the profile that allowed us to prosecute this case.
And I truly believe that without the knowledge that the individuals who put the time and effort into creating such a sensitive forensic piece of equipment, such as the M-Vac, this case would never have been solved.
So there you have it, the M-Vac system, a fascinating piece of forensic recovery. Just blows my mind. Jared, I want you to just walk our audience through, because before we went live, I asked you some specific questions. Does Suffolk County Police and the state police have the M-Vac?
Yes. Yeah, they both do. Now, the state lab up in Albany has one. I'm not sure that they've validated it, but yeah, they have one. And the Suffolk County folks, they're not an actual lab, so they don't have the same restrictions that the crime lab up in Albany would. So they should be able to start using it, I think, immediately after I trained them.
Ed, what does this mean as far as Rex Heuermann, the Gilgo Beach murder suspect that's in custody? Does this mean that evidence that was collected from 2010 when these bodies were recovered on Ocean Parkway in Gilgo Beach and Oak Beach, does this mean that all of that DNA can now be forensically scrubbed with the M-Vac?
Well, not necessarily the way you posed it. What it means is that they could take all of that evidence that they gathered in 2009, where they may have done swabs for DNA off that material, whether it's the netting, the burlap duck hunting, like a ghillie type netting, and the bonds and the binds and all the things that we use to tie these victims up. They could then redo all of those surfaces from those items again with the M-Vac to see if they can find any additional. Now, because the DNA that they did recover came from hairs of the wife and Rex on several of those victims from the wrappings and the tape and so forth. But again, it gives us a second shot at that material now to extract way more genetic materials than you could have with a swab.
Wow, fascinating. Jared, do you have anything else that maybe would be added into what Ed has said? Because now we looked at inside pictures and video of the home. They took parts of tile floors in the bathroom. They actually ripped up the entire contents of the tiles inside the home in Long Island, and they also cut out a piece of his tub and took an enormous amount of evidence out of that home in Massapequa Park, Long Island. When you look at a bathroom, these are potential places where murder victims could be brought and maybe packaged up and taken out and brought out to Ocean Parkway. And this is all speculative, obviously, but there's a real sense of, there's a reason behind them taking items from that bathroom. They don't just randomly take them. What could they be looking at where, you're talking like evidence recovery, where it pertains to, like, say, an M-Vac system with tile floors some 13 years later?
Wow. The interesting thing about tile is, with it being such a non-porous surface, swabbing actually does fairly well on there if you know the restricted area that you can cover. Technically, swabs aren't supposed to be able to cover more than about a 4 by 4 inch area. Other than that, it's kind of like what I talked about earlier, where you kind of saturate it and then it's just kind of spreading it around. But and Ed would certainly know a lot more about the efficiencies of a swab. But there was a study that came out of Illinois, out of University of Chicago, and they determined that on a lot of surfaces, swabs only collect between 20 and 40% of whatever the DNA is on there. And so the more porous the surface, which obviously tile isn't going to be a porous surface, but when you're talking about clothing, the netting that Ed was talking about, those kind of surfaces, I would bet there's still a fair amount of DNA, whatever was initially deposited on there, even if they've swabbed it. The chance that they were able to get all of it is pretty low.
Yeah, but Jarrett, on the tile surfaces, not necessarily the tile itself, because as you say, the porous nature of it, but the grout.
Yeah, the grout especially, that's going to be much more porous than the tile itself.
Right. So the grout could absorb body fluids and liquids and get in there deep. And it'll be very difficult for a swab to get that, because, as you know, when you take a swab over a rough surface like that grout, it'll tear the fibers out of the swab head as you're going across. It's like sandpaper, like rubbing a swab across a piece of sandpaper, and it'll fray the fibers of the swab. So the M-Vac would have a much better chance of getting deep down into anything that was absorbed in that grout and sucking it back out.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I'm hoping, as they tore it up, that they didn't lose any of that grout. It'd be, I don't know. I'm trying to kind of visualize it.
But let's show them, Ron, let's show them the photo.
Yeah, so I'm going to go to the actual piece because it's only less than a minute. So this is a local news. Again, this is a case that's local to. I live in Long Island, so this is when I was an active detective. This case was currently ongoing. So this is my home. I live in Nassau County, where Rex Heuermann's home. I live in that area. I'm 15 miles from his location. I'm about 20 miles from Ocean Parkway. So this is we're going to play this piece because it's just a short period. It's very short. So let's just let this whole thing play.
Hard drives turned over from the search in his home and about 2,500 pages of documents and photographs.
And within those documents, autopsy reports for the women he's accused of killing. There were also DNA reports and surveillance footage.
Now, those DNA reports, Ed, and I'm not going to keep stopping this, but those DNA reports would that be anything that, and I'm just thinking outside the box here, would that be anything that maybe if they didn't have strong DNA evidence where they can go back to that evidence? And that's what I was alluding to before, to try to get maybe a stronger profile or something stronger from some of the evidence that was collected. Is that a possibility?
I don't think the DNA reports that they're showing here are DNA reports of things that didn't have a profile. I believe these are the DNA reports that are associated with the linkage of the hairs with the mitochondrial DNA that was used to link the wife and Rex.
Okay.
Gotcha. But again, as we keep saying, yes, go back over all of that, all over the netting, the burlap, any clothing, the restraints, the tape, all of that could be re-examined with the M-Vac.
Excellent. Thank you, Ed.
Taken from inside his home.
Eyewitness News reporter Shantae Lands was in court this afternoon and joins us live in Riverhead. Shantae?
Accused Gilgo Beach serial killer Rex Heuermann appears in court.
All I can say is he's presumed innocent. There have been hundreds, if not thousands, of leads in this case, and we haven't even seen them yet.
Heuermann's attorney requested the mounting evidence from prosecutors, much of it pulled.
So here's a look outside. Ed, you and I were going over this. This is the front and the backyard views. Crime scene unit detectives.
Yeah, this is the front yard, yeah.
Right.
The porch, right.
Right, but they're going to show a shot from the back. So they were in the front and the back. You have state, federal, and local all working together, part of the task force.
From Heuermann's home.
The district attorney provided us with apparently 8 terabytes of discovery, which we're obviously going to go through with fine detail over the coming months.
Heuermann, an architect and father of 2, was arrested outside of his Manhattan office and charged in the deaths of Melissa Bartholomew, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello. Investigators are still trying to determine if he murdered Maureen Brainerd Barnes. Their bodies were 4 of 10 found along Gilgo Beach on Long Island South Shore more than a decade ago.
There were some victims who were family members of the victims who were here today.
Suffolk County District Attorney Ray Tierney is prosecuting the case.
Don't forget, it's continuing because the investigation is continuing. So we're talking about a massive amount of material.
Heuermann's family was not in court. His estranged wife, Asa Ellerup, briefly speaks with me at her Massapequa Park home. Standing in her foyer with her son by her side, Ellerup tells me her life is in turmoil, sharing these images of the chaos and destruction left behind that her attorney says was done by law enforcement.
Stop it right there.
Yep, I did.
Now, you can see, Jared, you can see here where it seems like they meticulously cut the tile out, okay, off of its, looks like, I don't know if that is a
drain.
No, I'm not talking about the drain. I see there is a floor drain, which is unusual for a residential bathroom. You typically don't see a floor drain in a residential bathroom, but I'm not sure if that is a concrete surface there. It's a mud job or a thin set job they used on the tile. But again, that material too is porous. It can absorb. So it looks like they meticulously took the tile and the grout in a nice pattern, because this is probably one of the meshed pattern tiles that are held together with the mesh, and then you inlay the grout on top of your thin set. Okay, so there's good possibility there, but you know what I'm thinking? They might have hit this with with the luminol or a blue star, and maybe they got some kind of reaction and for possible presence of blood, and so they took it. But again, that drain is very interesting because, like, as I said, you don't normally see a floor drain on a residential bathroom. Now you can see that the bathtub behind it, it appears to be a fiberglass tub, and they cut out a rectangular shape to apparently search inside of that bathtub area. Now, again, let's be mindful of the fact we have 4 sets of human remains, full bodies, and then there are the other victims that were dismembered that they haven't been linked to him yet. Okay, so maybe at one point in time, if this is the same serial killer here, he was dismembering bodies and transporting them to the Gilgo Beach area and depositing the body parts over there of those other victims that have not been linked to him.
Right.
So there's a possibility that something like that could have occurred in here.
Yeah, so we're looking at a total of 11, including the young child that was recovered out on Ocean Parkway. So there's another 7 sets of remains that have no closure, that we do not know who or how they got there. And again, you know, the Gilgo 4, we don't know at this point exactly where their murders took place. And again, I think the M-Vac, now that we know that they've had the M-Vac, and it's not like they just recently obtained these devices, they had to have been utilizing this behind the scenes in this case, and we'll hear about that. And that's why my next thing that I wanted to ask Jared, your M-Vac systems have been used in the court of law, obviously, in many cases. The evidence and the way it's collected through the M-Vac is admissible and can be used against someone in a court of law?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's gone through Daubert Fry cases, even an appellate course or appellate case. So yeah, it's not. I mean, initially when we first got into forensics and some of the very first cases, like, you know, the Crystal Bislanowicz case, it was challenged a lot more vigorously than it is now. But my understanding is most defense attorneys don't even bother anymore. It's got enough precedence behind it that it's admissible.
So, folks, for those of you who don't understand what Jared's talking about and admissibility, anytime that you try to use a novel or new forensics piece of equipment or a protocol or standard, it's going to go through a series of hearings because there's going to be challenges by the defense attorneys to try to suppress that information and suppress the work that was done with these new protocols, new instruments, and so forth. So it goes through a series of hearings, either a Daubert or Fry or both. And at these hearings, you'll have testimony given by experts about the equipment for and against it, and then a judge will make a decision whether it meets the scientific standards, and he or she will allow it into testimony.
Perfect. And this is a great education for the folks in the audience. There's a lot of people up until tonight maybe never heard about the M-Vac, and these are all true crime fans here, Jared. And again, they're fascinated with this technology. They're fascinated with forensics, DNA, and I know that after we had you on as a guest, somehow you teamed up with Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick, who is the DNA guru of, we had her on our channel, and I thought it was fascinating. I saw the little short video, the shorts that you put out on your channel, and it said Dr. Colleen loves the M-Vac. She's such a great.
She's amazing, isn't she?
Yeah. Here's another thing, Jared. Again, so we don't know exactly when he started killing, and if he ever stopped, but those bodies had to get to that beach somehow. So at that time, he owned a 2002 Chevy Avalanche, and he would later sell that, and it would go down to his brother's place in South Carolina. And just recently, they seized it with a warrant from South Carolina and brought it back. So that vehicle could go to a forensic garage, and then the M-Vac can be brought to the vehicle, and they could work that vehicle up to try to find any DNA in there that could link that vehicle to these victims, the intact bodies, and even the other victims that were dismembered, to see if there's a connection. Was this vehicle used in some way, shape, or form to transport them, the victims, from wherever they were murdered to where they were deposited in the Gilgo Beach area?
Oh yeah, we've had success in vehicles before, and even vehicles that have been, the suspect assumed that he had cleaned the vehicle good enough, but there's lots of little nooks and crannies that, any kind of DNA material, whether it be blood or even skin cells, saliva, doesn't matter. It can reach into places you would never think. It's kind of like, when you're trying to clean your car after your kids have eaten Cheerios, it's like you find dust everywhere, and you're just like, how did these kids manage to mess this car up this bad? Well, it's the same thing with body material. So, I would think that this guy would be smart enough to put the victims into the back, but if he happened to put any part of the victims in the cab, then especially cloth seats, who knows? They should at least try.
Well, one of his victims was witnessed by the victim's roommate to have been seated in the vehicle, and he drove away with her before she went missing. So
it was Amber Costello, her boyfriend, or live-in boyfriend / whatever. He witnessed her go into the vehicle with him. But also, too, wouldn't, Ed, the Lacardge exchange principle happen if he's wrapping up and packaging these decedents and putting them in the back where we think he did, in the back of that Avalanche, in the cab, in the trunk area, and then went back into the vehicle, parts of hairs and fibers and so forth.
Right. So he's getting their DNA on him, and then he gets into the vehicle and transfers their DNA, steering wheel, the gas pedal, the seat, the seatbelt, the door handles, all of that transfer, course contamination and transfer can be occurring. And also remember, the back of that pickup truck, that Avalanche, had a hard cover over the top of it. So it may sealed up the bed of the truck.
Right. And we showed that on a previous live stream. I've actually have it in the queue. I could play that video to show the back of it. But again, if the M-Vac, which we know it is, in possession, bless you.
Thank you.
The M-Vac is in possession of the Suffolk County Crime Lab and the New York State Police, that they've used both of those units on whatever evidence and whatever they have in custody. JC sends in a $10 super chat, and thank you for the support. And he or she says, Ed, I'm learning so much from reading your book. Can't thank you enough. So that's the book.
Our pleasure. She won the book in our lottery there.
Oh, that's correct. Yes, there you go. So Jared, I don't mean. Listen, I want to take you back so many years, because you did an interview for the BYU, and it's an alumni profile. I know you might have seen this maybe back in the day or whatever. I want to play this because Jared goes into talking about the M-Vac and its inception. So I think that this is a good one. Jared, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to play this.
Nope.
There he is. Who's that young man?
Man, that was a long time ago.
Let's let it rip.
Bradley. I'm the president of M-Vac Systems, which is a wet. I'm Jared Bradley. I'm the president of M-Vac Systems, which is a wet vacuum forensics DNA collection system, and I'm a BYU alumnus. I'm in Midway, Utah, which is a beautiful little resort town on the backside of the Wasatch Front. And yet in 1995, there was a grisly murder that was done here. There was a young girl that was brought up here from Salt Lake City, and she was brutally murdered next to this river. She was bludgeoned with a rock, and that's all they had to go on, was her body and a rock for 18 years. This case was a cold case. Fast forward to modern day, they were able to use the M-Vac system to get the perpetrator's DNA from his hand off of that rock. And that's how the case is moving forward. My dad invented this. The idea first came to him back in 1996, 97 timeframe. And it followed a couple of years of thought after the 1993 E. coli outbreak.
I want to go back because this is Jared's dad, Dr. Bruce Bradley. So I want to just let a little bit of this play back. So everybody take a look, because some of you that are coming in late might not know it, but this is his father, right?
My dad invented this. The idea first came to him back in 1996, 97 timeframe. And it followed a couple of years of thought after the 1993 E. coli outbreak. It started with food safety. I actually ran into a fellow BYU graduate and friend of mine that I hadn't seen in a lot of years. And after graduation, he went into the FBI. I was describing this system to him in the context of using it on food services. And he basically said, I wish I would have had something like that on some of my crime scenes. We took it to a private lab, had them test it, and they'd never seen recoveries like that before. The M-Vac system is a wet vacuum, so it sprays a sterile solution down and vacuums it up at the same time. So it gets down into the cracks and crevices and is able to collect DNA where the other methods just can't get it.
To have a technology like this where it allows us to go back to a case where we couldn't find it before, it's phenomenal. I can't describe in words how powerful that is.
It doesn't take a genius to figure a cotton swab can only get so much, and you hope you get the right area. But with this, you can do the whole surface and still get what you need.
DNA has been such a phenomenal tool for law enforcement to identify criminals, and the M-Vac system is as important to DNA as DNA is to law enforcement.
This system has taken me all over the world, not only in pretty much all parts of the United States, but I've been to China and South Africa, Europe, and different places. Everybody talks the universal language of being able to solve a crime. It doesn't matter if it's a law enforcement professional in Salt Lake City or South Africa. They all want to solve the crime, and the M-Vac system is becoming a tool that is enabling them to get better DNA profiles, and that's moving cases forward. It's exciting to see that. And my experience at BYU has been such an incredible foundation for me, not just in the education that I got there and the sciences and the things that I was able to learn that I'm now using, but just the experience there of growing up. I met my wife there, which is always a phenomenal thing. BYU has been one of the mainstays, one of the reasons that I am who I am. I'm Jared Bradley. I'm the president of M-Vac Systems. We help investigators solve more crime, and I'm a BYU alumnus.
I thought that was a fantastic video, and I had to play it. So, I didn't.
I appreciate that, man. Plug for my Cougars.
Yeah. Proud. Your dad looked so proud of this device. And when I watched that today at my office, because I tried to prepare for the show in little dribs and drabs because I was being pulled all over the place today. But when I watched this piece, I had to watch it 2-3 times, because when I saw your father's face, he just looked like he was beaming with pride over this machine. And for him to see you now as his son taking this thing into the 21st century and going forward with it, it's just, I think it's phenomenal. So
yeah, Ron, you're killing me.
Kudos to you, brother. Kudos. I got a lot of respect. And this is about getting closure for victims and their families. This is important stuff, and we take this very seriously. And that is why, having relationships and friendships like, Jared Bradley and his staff that work to provide these valuable resources to law enforcement and all over not only just the nation, but all over the world. I'm honored to be even just having you here on the show with me. Amber, thank you so much for that super chat. She says, can this be used on something with multiple touches of various people? For example, door handles. Jared, I'll let you take that.
That's a really good question, Amber. And it actually ties really closely with the case that we're talking about here in Long Island, because especially when you're using the M-Vac, getting DNA is usually not the problem. Getting usable DNA is what is actually really important. And let me explain what I mean. Getting DNA from a common area, which is like if you go into a hotel, you would especially think the lobby, the couches, door handles, like what you're talking about, are really common areas where there might be hundreds, if not thousands of people. You would be able to collect so much DNA from there, it would blow your mind. But you wouldn't be able to use it because with the current technology of the lab, as amazing as it is, it can't separate more than about 5 or 6 people at the most. And typically anything more than about 3, you start getting into areas that it's really difficult to decipher and tell the difference between one person versus the next. So imagine if everybody on this is an analogy that I use. If everybody on a hospital floor was hooked up to one heart monitor, and so everybody's heart was contributing to the heart monitor, it would just be you would just see all these it would just be a mess. You wouldn't be able to tell whose heartbeat is different than somebody else's. And so DNA is kind of the same way. You have to be able to not only tell whose heartbeat is where, but also and then be able to compare that to another person. And so it's kind of limited. I mean, yeah, you could use it on a door handle, the short answer, but being able to actually tell, this is Jared's DNA or this is Ed's DNA, that's where the difficult part comes in. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. The separation is the key here, and you'll get mixtures, but once you get into those kind of numbers, it just all becomes garbled.
Right.
So
I wanted to go to the chat. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Keep that thought because I just wanted to go to the chat because there's over 1,600 people here. I want to say thank you to everyone who is posting questions. I'm going to ask you now because it's getting towards the back end of the show. Hashtag Ed, hashtag Jared, hashtag DutyRon for your questions in the chat. Hold them until until I give you the cue to give you those ask the questions. So it'll take 5 or 10 minutes to look at user generated questions. But Ed, go ahead with your thought because I just wanted to say hello to everybody in the chat and thank them for being here.
Yeah, I was just going to say now because there was also the theory that he used that duck boat that he owned with a friend to go across the bay and deposit the bodies in the Gilgo Beach area over there. Well, we can get our hands on that duck boat and get the M-Vac to work on it and see if we can't find any genetic markers in there to any of these victims.
How well does that work on, like, say, that metal surface of a duck boat, Jared?
I think it worked fine. It's just a matter of, how exposed to the sun and the elements was it. We're talking 12, 13 years ago, some of these cases or even more. The elements, sunlight, moisture, that's going to cause the cells to lyse and break apart.
Right.
So, but you'd be able to get into some of those cracks and crevices, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Give it a try. They have nothing to lose by trying.
Right. You'll never know if you don't do it.
And I feel that theory is it's a low probability that he did that because I showed on my last live stream a drone shot of the actual location where the recoveries of the Gilgo 4, these 4 victims, Melissa Bartholomew, Megan Waterman, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, and Amber Costello. And if he did go into the bay side, Ed, he would have had to beach that duck boat, and it's a very small area where you could beach it, and then he'd have to go through some mucky marsh to get to the 20 feet off of Ocean Parkway. So if you look at the and I wish that I had it here, but I'd have to start searching for it. But you guys have to trust me on this, and you can go back and look at the live stream that I did. When you look at it, the most probable case scenario of what he did was the car, because all you'd have to do is pull onto the shoulder, drag the remains out into the thicket, and then it's just 15 or 20 feet. The other way would involve a lot of physical activity of pulling these remains, and again, you have to realize at that time they weren't skeletonized and they weren't decomposed as far as we know when he deposited them there. So it was a little bit more weight. Granted, these were small, petite women, But the bottom line is it's much more of an effort, and it would take much longer to do that. But you could always rule that out, and that's the great part about this device, is that you could take the boat, you could take all of his belongings and check it out, make sure. Jared, I got more M-Vac stuff that I want to show, because you did a full demo. It was 16 minutes. I can't show it all, so I fast forwarded to the good parts where you're M-Vac in the hat and M-Vac in a rock. But you are all PPE'd up. Can you explain to the audience, before I show it, the reason why you're looking like you're in an operating room when you're operating this stuff?
Oh yeah. Well, every one of us sloughs off about 400,000 cells a day. And so, between just skin that we're touching, the breath from our, as we speak, hair falling out, all that stuff, 400,000 cells. Well, the lab only needs about 10 of those to develop a complete profile. So yeah, when you're sampling, especially with something as aggressive and sensitive as the M-Vac, then you certainly want to protect the evidence from getting contaminated with your DNA. I mean, that's, Ed, I can't think of anything worse than the lab comes back and say, by the way, Ed, you were in the profile.
Yeah. And that's why we have to give our exemplar samples of the crime scene investigators, and the DNA analyst has to be on file. And so when a genetic profile is first developed, it's run against us first before it goes into an unknown. Yeah, you don't want that ever happen. You don't want to be the source found in there.
That's a big embarrassment right there. And plus, you got, you're gonna take a lot of digs from your fellow colleagues when your profile shows up. And
listen, we had it happen.
That wouldn't go over very well on the stand either.
Yeah, we had a high-profile homicide in Staten Island. That's exactly what happened. Cross-contamination issue. A husband killed his wife. They were both school teachers, and he stabbed her to death and murdered her. And he came home and calls 911. I found my wife like this, right? And the murder weapon was in his briefcase, and they found it, and it was a knife, and they took it out, and they put it in a cardboard box, and they sealed it in there with wire ties to keep the knife from moving around. Well, the one wire tie had the DNA from another detective that had previously touched a bulk batch of wire ties that were in the equipment section, and transferred his DNA, because he wasn't wearing gloves when he touched these things, to that one wire tie, and it then transferred to the knife. And that detective was on vacation in Florida, had nothing to do with the crime scene.
Wow. How many years ago was that, Ed? That was back in the early 2000s. I think I remember that, like 2001.
Yeah, it was after I retired.
Oh, okay. All right. So you retired in like around 2005.
2004.
Okay. Royal, thank you for the super chat. Will there be bodies removed from the ground and unknown victims in order to connect the rest? I would have to say probably not, unless there was strong evidence. You just can't go randomly exhuming bodies. It's a very, it happens very rarely in cases. So thank you for that question, Ed. Jared,
yeah.
I don't know if you got anything else to add.
No, you wouldn't pull a body out to run an M-Vac over it after it's been through autopsy and washed several times and given to a funeral home and all that stuff. So
right. All right, let's this is in HD quality, and this is what we're looking at here. Jared, could you just describe, this looks like some kind of hospital gear. What is this?
Well, that's the full system, all assembled and everything. It's got the machine itself is called the SEC. You can see that up kind of on the upper corner right there. Yeah, that stands for support equipment case, and that houses the vacuum pump, the solution delivery system.
It's like an IV bag here, right? And you close
yeah,
it.
that's where we got the idea out of the hospitals. So, but then when you start looking at all the tubes and the sampling head over there on the right side,
right,
that's all the what we call the supplies or consumables, and including the IV bag itself. That's a consumable as well. So all of that can be used Well, the M-Vac itself is only used once because it's going to have DNA all through it. And we just don't have a way to 100% be positive that it's going to be sterile for the next case or the next piece of evidence. And so as we're assembling it, we have the extension tube, and that can allow you to move away from the machine itself. You can move over, and that, like if you wanted to process a car, for example, you could just pre-position the machine itself in one spot and then work all the way around the car. You wouldn't have to, move the machine as you go.
Right.
And then right in that frame right there, I'm holding the sampling head. And that's what actually, that's really where the magic happens, because that sprays the solution and applies the vacuum pressure onto the evidence surface. And then through that smaller tube, the liquid and the DNA is going to get collected in the bottle that you can kind of see right below there. And here you're going to see it actually in action.
This is the bottle right here.
Yeah, that's the collection bottle. That's where all the DNA goes initially.
Right.
And then we concentrate it. Once we're done collecting, then we use a filter, and we get rid of all the excess liquid, and that concentrates the DNA onto a filter, and that enables the lab to have a more concentrated sample.
Right. Yeah, and you're going to show that here. I'm going to let the rest of this play because I'm already halfway through it, because I didn't want to show the whole 16 minutes because of time constraints. But I'm going to link this video and all of the, his whole M-Vac channel, and you guys can look through all the stuff afterwards. I know if I did a poll, if I asked everybody, do you want to watch this whole video? Everybody would be like, yeah, I got my popcorn out. I'm ready. Joey Brooklyn says, Jared, is it battery operated?
It is not. It works on a 110 volt, or if I'm going overseas, 220. So
it's plugged in somewhere back here. Maybe this is the plug back here. I don't know.
Yeah, I'd take a couple of car batteries and not to operate it, but just to that initial charge that it takes to get it rolling.
Right. I saw handles coming up from one of the units at the top. Is that like so it could be mobile and you could take it around into locations? Okay.
Yeah, that's just a design we put in to make it so it's a little easier to lift.
Okay. All right. Let's play a little of this, because you go into M-Vac in a hat and a rock, I believe, and a piece of clothing.
Okay. M-Vac and why it works so well. Again, it sprays in the middle and vacuums along the outside. So if we do it on the actual evidence, you put the sampling head down, you find flat, and then you turn the solution on, and you just suck away. And you can turn the solution off if there's a little extra liquid. That's no problem. You can just go and just suck it up. Now I'm going to turn this on here and show you really quickly. You can see through this tubing that it's now, so the solution is going down, and then it's sprayed onto the evidence, and then it's actually vacuumed up, and then it's being collected up through this line and into this bottle. So you can see it's starting to build up in the bottle, and that's basically how it works. So once you've collected all the areas that you want to, now you have your sample. So all your DNA and your liquid is there in that bottle. That's how I'd use it on the hat. I'll show you here on this brick. You just figure out where you think the person touched it, or where you think the blood might be, or evidence. If it's on a more smooth surface like that, that's great. But even on the rougher surfaces, it may not get a 360-degree contact with it all the time, but it's usually enough that it's plenty to collect the DNA off of the.
Ron, let's just stop it here for a second.
Okay.
Okay. So, folks, this is just a demonstration. Now, Jared wouldn't do that with the same head that he used on the hat. Okay. It's just a demonstration, because, yes, there would be all kinds of cross-contamination issues going on now.
In this video, he further explains, he says that we would change out the bottle, obviously. The IV fluid could stay, because that's not, it's just feeding it, the bag, the solution.
It would be the bottle and the head. And what else, Jared?
Tubing.
Yeah, the sampling head, especially because that comes in direct contact with the evidence, and then all the way back to the bottle. That's all a one-time use.
Right.
So I want to let a
Okay.
little bit more of this play because this is fascinating to see this as it's working. And we're almost done here. So
you see it moving along there, and again, you can see it collecting here. It's going straight into the bottle. Turn the liquid off. Go back and get extra if you need it, and then just keep going. So we've had lots of cases where the item, such as this brick, it's either too rough or too porous for a swab or another method to really collect very well off of it. But the M-Vac was able to collect plenty of evidence. One particular case was the Crystal Beslanowicz case, where the victim was bludgeoned to death with a rock, and swabbing had yielded less than half of a nanogram. The M-Vac actually collected 21 nanograms of DNA off of that rock. And so, and this is exactly how they did it. So they just put the M-Vac right on top of the rock and just vacuum away. So it seems simple, but again, that training, we got lots of hands-on experience. Things like that are pretty common. A lot of homicides or rapes turned into homicides. Lots of reasons to be able to collect DNA off of clothing. So again, we put the sampling head onto the clothing. Oh, and by the way,
he explains right here.
Obviously, with new pieces of evidence, we would change this out. So, as you can imagine, because of the solution that's going through there, this is all contaminated with DNA. So, if this was a different case, I would replace the M-Vac with a sterile one. You can reuse the tubing and the solution, but the M-Vac itself, you need one M-Vac per item that you're collecting from. So, all right.
Now, does that run into where it gets costly? Because obviously those items aren't probably cheap, no?
No, it's once you actually get the machine, it kind of rounds out to about $100 per sample.
Oh,
So, but
bad.
you know, if you're talking a homicide,
Yeah, no, that's not bad.
I don't know the numbers that I've seen, Ed, and you guys can both probably attest to this, but a homicide might cost a department $1 million by the time they're done, between the cost of all the investigators, you guys actually investigating all the DNA that they test. Yeah, so $100, $1,500 if they did 15 of those samples with an M-Vac, that's nothing.
Yeah. Let's go to the chat for questions. Yeah, I mean, investigations are very costly. Getting cell phone records and subpoenaing, cell companies and all of that stuff is very costly. So, okie dokie, what do you got there, Ed? I saw you just put that up on the screen.
So, Jared, okie dokie is asking, isn't DNA water soluble though? And how does it dissolve? How does it not dissolve, rather? And she wants to know what the solution is.
So the solution is actually, it's mostly water. It's got a little bit of phosphate salt in it as a stabilizer. But no, to answer your question, the DNA is actually, when it's encompassed in the cell, it's actually pretty tough. Now, you can't leave it for 48 hours, or I don't know exactly how long it would survive being immersed in water, but just with as long as it's in the M-Vac, it's fine.
It's a PBS. Is it a phosphate buffer saline solution?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay. All right. What else?
We're looking.
Any more questions?
I see one here. I didn't even get a chance to read it. It comes in. It says #Jared. Why does the vac head cover such a small surface, especially when dealing with areas like a bathroom? Thank you for that question.
Well, it's interesting. We've had people ask why the sampling head is so big. So it's just one of those where we kind of had to find the optimal size. Being a small company, we couldn't make multiple sizes. And so we had one. We wanted to cover about the curvature of an orange. and be able to, it's about an inch and 3/8 wide, or 35 millimeters. So it's not small like a pen, but it does cover a fairly large area. And so it's also going to be fairly rare that you're going to cover like the entire bathroom floor, for example. I mean, most likely, if a victim was killed there, the victim's blood's going to be everywhere. And so typically you're looking for suspect DNA off of different pieces of evidence. So, I mean, this case is a little bit different because you're wondering if one of the victims or multiple victims were actually killed there in the bathroom. And so you may want to cover the entire area, but you could still do it. It might take a little longer, but you could still do it.
Jared, thank you for answering that. The bulk of the questions are being peppered at you. So here's one from Kel, our channel member and a great friend of the of Crime Time with DutyRon. She says, Jared, if the grout is sealed, can you still get DNA out of it?
Wow, that's a great question. Sealed before or after the victim was in there? That would be a big question for me. If it was, I don't know, sealed, it's almost like using the super glue method for fingerprints on like shell casings. Once that happens, it's kind of the DNA is kind of encased in it. Yeah. And it's really hard to get to.
Right. Mm-hmm. Here's another one. They're peppering you, Jared. There's no rest for the weary.
Hey, bring it. Come on.
BB Diamond says, Jared, if there are two persons' DNA on an item, does the M-Vac separate them? That's a good one.
Yeah, that's a great question, BB. And the short answer is no. Just like the swab doesn't separate them, that's so that the M-Vac just collects whatever is on that evidence, and then once it gets to the lab is once, well, they'll develop the profiles and then they can use different methods, but they're the ones that actually separate it.
Fantastic.
If they can, I'm assuming they, you know, two people wouldn't be too much of a problem.
Let's give Jared a break. Here's one for Ed. Hashtag Ed.
Good.
What's the name of your book, Ed?
Okay, so I got Crime Scene Investigations, 4th edition. Then there's Practical Crime Scene Investigations for Hot Zones. Then there's Crime Scene Management, A Path Forward, and Crime Scene Evidence, Crime Scene to Courtroom.
That's a lot of books. I have them all linked on DutyRon.com, and they're in our Amazon bookstore too, so you guys can go on there and check it out. Marianne, here's another one peppering poor Jared again. Can the M-Vac inside the drain? And she says, thanks.
Marianne, great question. Inside a drain, I imagine you probably could, and I imagine they'd just tear that drain out of there and then open it up.
Yeah, I pulled many drains or traps out of plumbing, and then we take the contents and dump them into the appropriate packaging jar, and then what's left over, you can try to get in there and swab. I don't know that depending on the size of the drain, mind you, now if you got a commercial like 3-inch diameter drain, you might be able to get the head of the M-Vac into parts of it, but
just kind of
it's
I don't
really
know.
difficult.
Especially after years and years of use, I would question
what
would still be left in there. If the victim was, oh, sorry, Ron, go ahead.
But they're saying that drain in the middle of the floor, it probably is not getting used that often. And I'm thinking, from a standpoint of architectural or whatever, whoever put that together, they're thinking like when the toilet overflows, or if you have the tub overflowing into the bathroom, now you're saving the rest of the house becoming flooded, and maybe that drain's used. So maybe it's used very infrequently.
Right, but then you'd probably go underneath the floor and look for where the actual trap is.
Cut it out.
Yeah.
Cut out that pipe going down to where it probably leads out, because there's city sewers in over in that area, so it's not cesspool or septic.
Septic. Yeah.
So it's a great question, and I think it has some good validity to it, because in that situation there, and obviously they didn't cut that drain out, but it's not something that's frequently used. Kristen's not giving Jared a break. She says, once the evidence is collected, when are the results back? Jared, they want to know when the results comes in.
Yeah, well, that is not dependent on the M-Vac. That is going to be dependent on the lab. So
That's correct.
on a case like this, I'll bet it got moved right to the front. And the process itself, and Ed, you've got a lot of experience with the crime lab there in New York.
Mhm.
Obviously they're going to be the best of the best. So a couple of
Yeah,
days.
I mean, yeah. Well, you're talking in a rush job, you can get it done in an hour. If you had to get it done, you can do it in an hour, and that's extraction, amplification, all the things that you need to do with the sample. Okay, but normally we're talking weeks. Okay, on a DNA case. But like I said, we've seen cases like where was that case? Where was it? Tennessee? Where they?
Which one are you referring to?
The young lady that was out jogging and
right. Yeah, that was Tennessee. Yes,
Tennessee. She got attacked. They had that in one day. They got the profile and into the system in one day. Got the perp.
Let me go over some of these super chats because I have them all highlighted. I don't want to forget anybody, and this is from the beginning of the show. Jennifer, thank you for becoming a member. Amber Nelson, if you're still here, she says, don't forget to hit the like button, everybody. Kindness and Grace, thank you for being a member for a month. I appreciate you. Kathy D, hit the like button. Everyone's saying hit the like button. JC, so happy to be here. Hey, we're happy to have you. Thank you. Thank you to everybody. Whether you're a channel member, whether you're a subscriber, whether you're a casual viewer, when you leave comments in the chat, in the live chat, and down below in the comment section, it's invaluable to us because without you guys, we have nothing. If we do these live shows and nobody shows up to them, there's no sense in doing them. So we give thanks to you guys for your engagement, your really tough questions that you pepper us with, but also your respect that you show to not just us, but also to the victims and their families. And I thank you for that. Black Rose is a member for 30 months. And she says, Jared Bradley, thank you. Thank you both, to you and your dad. So thank you for that, Black Rose.
Yeah, I absolutely appreciate that.
We got another one coming in from Retta Winery. Okay. She says, yeah, Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick is awesome. Robbie, our good friend from Australia, sent in a super sticker. He came on the other day and was giving us a whole bunch of Australia Aussie talk. So it's always good to hear from our subscribers from over in Australia. JC says, Ed, I'm learning so much from your book. We already put that one up, but I'm getting to them all. I want to highlight all the super chats that came in. Amber says, can this be used on something multiple touches? We answered that. People, various examples, door handles. Yes, we talked about that. Retta Royal Castrata, thank you so much for being here. Cat H, thank you for that super chat. Thank you for being a member. I think I got them all. All right. Listen, there's so much more to talk about in this case, and there's going to be so much as it pertains to evidence with Rex Heuermann. Suffolk County and this task force that they put together, they've been working on this case since February of 2022, the task force. This case has been in existence since 2010, and they really kind of dragged their feet with this investigation. Suffolk County had a lot of turmoil with their district attorney, with their chief. There's been a lot of things that happened negative in the past, but I don't live in the past. And I want you guys to understand is we're getting justice for some of these victims, and there's more justice to come. And technology like M-Vac and DNA and forensic advancements, that's what's going to be the keys to solving these cases and to getting justice for not just the victims, but their families and for everybody who lives in the surrounding areas. We heard from Melanie Little, who's a mother of 5 and an attorney. She said there was periods of time where her and her 5 daughters were living in fear because there was a serial killer that was running around in our community. And it was an uneasy feeling. again, I live in Nassau County. I live in that area. I go to those beaches with my family. So I'm just thrilled that the task force under our former NYPD Chief of Detectives, Rodney Harrison, and all of the hardworking detectives and investigators, not just police personnel, the civilian personnel, folks like Jared and his team, and people who can provide resources to get a positive result. We thank them. We give them thanks and praise because they take out time from their families to do these investigations. So much thanks. Jared, I want to just personally say thank you to you, and I'm asking you kindly, would you please come back soon and discuss M-Vac on some of the other cases that we cover?
Hey, let's do it tomorrow night, man. I'm ready.
I'm ready. I'm ready. No, it's my wife's birthday weekend, so I'm going to be traveling out of the New York area. So
I'm just kidding, man. Anytime.
You got
anytime.
All
Ed,
right.
Thank you so much for taking out the time. Ed is in a hotel. He's teaching. What else? Forensics to somebody. He's teaching. He's doing his thing. So thank you, Ed, for being here. I want to thank our replay viewers, the moderators, all of the folks who became subscribers. If you're not yet following us on all things social media, it's one word, DutyRon. Follow Jared on all of his social media. I have it linked in the description down below. Go check out the M-Vac YouTube channel. And what is your YouTube channel name? I forgot. It's something crime, right?
Well, the podcast is All Things Crime.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'd love everybody to come follow me over there. We have great discussions. I've interviewed Colleen Fitzpatrick and a whole bunch of detectives. I mean, professionals like you guys. I'd love to have you on my show, actually. And
anytime.
And obviously M-Vac Systems. We have a YouTube channel that we have tons of videos on there. If you have any questions about the M-Vac, please shoot me a message, and yeah, I'd love to answer them.
And folks, it's all linked in the description. So if you look at this video or if you're watching it on the replay, Jared's YouTube channel and the podcast is there, the M-Vac YouTube channel. And I also took the liberty of linking his M-Vac website in the description, and I hyperlinked it. It's been on my DutyRon.com since the last time you were with us. So
awesome. Appreciate that.
Yeah. So anybody that wants that information, again, we always send out strength, prayers, and positive vibes to these victims' families, and to all the investigators as stated. Ed, I know you got something to say before we end this.
That's right. Stay safe, folks. Stay prepared and watch your six.
Jared, thank you for all you do, and stand by for a short message from our cop team. That's Kara, Ed's dog, Oscar, my dog, and Popeye, my security, 38-year-old African gray who's hanging out with me here. Good night from New York City, and thank you for joining, guys.